I'm Scott, and welcome back to Heroes Among Us. This episode is about the sinking of U-645. It is titled, No One Is Coming. What I'm about to share is dramatized. We don't know exactly what happened aboard U-645 that night, but survivors from the Schenck remembered hearing faint cries for help over the radio in German, the last desperate cries of men trapped beneath the sea. And ex-German U-boat captains I spoke to in the 90s shared some of their stories, which I couldn't include in the book. They were our enemy, yet they were sailors doing their duty just as my father and his shipmates were. When survivors of previous U-boats were taken aboard Schenck, my dad said that they weren't treated as enemies. There was an unwritten code among the U.S. sailors. They were treated as sailors. They gave them clothing, food, and medical aid. They were guarded, but shown kindness and respect. That's why I feel it's righteous to include their story here. U-645, the hunter, became the hunted. Schenck's depth charges had damaged her. She had to make a desperate attempt to surface. U-645 blew ballast and breached the surface, but over there in the darkness and heavy seas, Schenck was steaming at flank speed directly towards them, her bow crashing through the waves. Schenck's deck guns opened up. 20mm rounds hit the U-boat. It was going to be rammed. In one last desperate attempt to survive, the captain crash dove the boat, but it was futile. U-645 had already been severely damaged. The second round of depth charges had found their mark. Inside U-645, the lights flickered, pipes burst, rivets popped. The hull shuddered as the boat plunged deeper into the blackness. It was flooding and out of control. Men scrambled in the narrow passageways, their faces pale and slick with sweat. The air was heavy with oil, humidity, and fear. Every sailor knew what the groaning metal meant. The pressure was winning. It was only a matter of seconds. In the radio room, an operator sent a desperate message, Gott hilf uns, Gott hilf uns. God help us. But he knew no one is coming. Each cry went into the darkness, but no reply came, only the hiss of static. Another explosion rocked the boat. Lights went out, plunging the men into blackness. A chorus of shouts, prayers, and curses filled the steel coffin. The commander's voice tried to cut through, "Rule, rule!" Silence. But the silence was broken by another explosion, then by the sea itself forcing its way in. Some wept, some prayed, some simply stared into the dark waiting, men in their final moments. And then with a final groan of tortured metal, the Atlantic claimed U-645. The pressure crushed her hull in an instant. The submariners aboard never saw the dawn of Christmas Eve. On the Schenck, Robbie sat at his radio, straining to hear through the static. The last message had broke through, faint and desperate, Gott hilf uns. A shipmate glanced at him. What did they say? Robbie lowered his eyes. God help us. The sound man muttered, God's the only one who can hear them now. They're gone. I heard it breaking up. Those men were enemies, yes, but they were sailors. And their final words, God help us, haunted those who heard them. This is part of their story too. At the reunions, the men aboard Schenck often spoke of how the sinking of U-645 and other U-boats stayed with them. Some felt the Germans should be remembered and honored. Others could not bring themselves to do so. But they all agreed on one truth. That is the horrible nature of war. People die. They also spoke about the sailors who crewed those U-boats. They weren't party officials, and most weren't Nazis. They were Kriegsmarine, sailors, many of them barely out of their teens, drafted or conscripted with little choice but to serve. By the end of the war, Germany's U-boat arm was almost annihilated. Of roughly 40,000 men who served in the U-boat force, more than 28,000 were killed. That's a casualty rate of nearly 70%, the highest of any military branch in World War II. So yes, they were the enemy, but they were also sailors doing their duty, facing the sea and death with the same fear, the same courage, and the same God, and the same prayers as the men aboard Schenck and the Leary. And this is their story too. It deserves to be remembered. No one was coming to save U-645. No one could survive the submarine's crushing descent. In the next episode, we'll follow the men of the Leary forced into the freezing Atlantic, fighting not the enemy now, but the ocean itself. That dramatic episode will be based on actual stories of the survivors. If you want more stories like this, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. Until then, never forget the heroes among us. God bless. Stay safe. Out.